Sure.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Terrie Novak, fellow adoptee. Really looking forward to our conversation. So we came up with a theme. Terrie had done a lot of work in thinking about what we could talk about before she actually got in touch with me. So that's great. And she got in touch with me, and it's usually the other way around. So it's delighted that I'm getting onto people's radars, and the podcast is getting onto people's radars. So that's great to hear. Great to hear. So welcome to the show, Jerry. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here and sharing me with all your friends.
Yeah, beautiful. So I think we've got a theme for today of awakening, and then a kind of like a sub theme around creativity and some new awarenesses that you came through, and I guess you're still coming through writing, are you?
Yes, I've been writing for 5 or 6 years now.
Yeah.
And one day I just got this idea. I don't know exactly where it came from, but it was like, you will write about adoption, Terrie.
Yeah. What was the context for that?
Well, I had
Did
written a
it come out
couple.
of? Did it come out of? It came. Was there a conversation, or was there something that was a precursor to that, or did it just arrive as a complete bolt out of the blue?
Yeah, no, it was actually a little bit instigated. So as I was talking through with my friends about my previous books, uh, people getting to know you, they'll say, tell me something about you, that maybe everybody doesn't know. And I'm like, and it always came out, I'm adopted. And they're like, oh, and that seemed to be very intriguing to people. And what was interesting to me was, why is that so intriguing to people when I say that? And so that's kind of what prompted it. I'm like, I think for my next writing project, since people show interest in this, I'm gonna look into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What was kind of, I mean, I didn't have this deep inner need
No.
to look into it. But once I decided to go ahead and start outlining, I started outlining what I was going to do. It turned into an opportunity to take time and honor my parents. So my parents are elderly, in their late 80s, and I'm like, I'm going to interview them, like I would subjects for a any other book I was writing, and I'm like, I'll get a chance to get my mom and dad on audio, and tell their stories and that kind of thing. And so I was really looking forward to it from that perspective of honoring my parents, my adopted parents.
Yeah.
And so what was interesting to me as I asked them questions about, like, before I was adopted, why they decided to go into adoption. And this was back in the early 60s. So I was surprised there were things they completely blocked out. They had zero memory of. And I'm like, that's interesting. Like perhaps it was traumatic for them. I wondered why they couldn't remember any of it. Maybe just because of their age. But then when I talked about that moment where they actually, they talked about this, that the picked you up from the agency moment, they remembered every single detail. What the office looked like, what the people were wearing, what the papers were they dealt with, how I was handled, what I was wearing, all that kind of thing. And I'm like, now that's incredible. They remember every single detail about that day, whose car they borrowed to get there. But they couldn't remember a thing about what happened before that. And so that got me, so then allowed myself to be curious. And I realized that this was going to be more than just a love story, that it was going to include some things that I hadn't previously taken time to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um, my mum was telling me the other day about telling me that I was adopted because they were going to back to the same agency to pick up my little sister. So I was 2 or just under 2 or about that time. And apparently I complained that my sister got my blanket or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
But I got a toy or something like that to distract me, I guess, from having a little sister. So yeah, but I've not asked my mum in depth and interviewed them clearly like you have. So was this the memory of the peak moment and lack of memory around the other stuff, was that one of your newer kind of awarenesses that you came to? Is that?
It was. I didn't realize, I just didn't take the time to know they had never previously talked about their experience. They always kind of gave me the traditional stories. I always knew I was adopted. We had extensive baby book. The baby book included things like the receipt for, the fees payment in it, which was always kind of an interesting debate between me and my adopted brother. We debate about why one person cost more than the other person. And joked about it. But I mean, just like interesting little aspects of your childhood, it was just part of what I took for granted, which was normal. And then when you start talking about it to people, they're like, you had a receipt in your baby book? Like, well, yeah, kind of like, didn't everybody? Your mom didn't keep your receipt?
Yeah.
But yeah, just finding out these details, hearing their perspective, realizing there was an element of pain that my parents went through was one of the first things. I'm like this empathy that I'd never thought of having before. Like I developed this new empathy that I didn't even know was necessary for the overall experience from my parents' perspective.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how, that's when when I talk about the awakenings, it wasn't like Big Bang awakening. It was little steps with each person. I allowed myself to, empathize with and explore into their stories, and imagine what their experience was, around, other than just my experience, but like the energy and the experiences other people had around me. So it started with my parents, and that was really beautiful. And they loved talking about it, by the way. If you haven't ever sat down and really dug into your parents giving details, I would highly recommend it.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating, what they remember and don't remember, and the details that are in their hearts and how their eyes sparkle, at certain moments. It's really beautiful. And that shifted to my brother. It's interesting you mentioned your sister, because in that conversation, then we always went to my brother. Now, my brother passed about a decade ago. And so, yeah, thank you. And so when we went into speaking about my brother, like we got an opportunity to remember some beautiful things about him. And that's when I realized I had more work to do on grieving with my brother. And it also gave me an opportunity in my writing exercise to explore adoptive sibling relationships.
Yeah.
And I had never done that before. And that was like, again, I just following my curiosity through this creative process. I learned a lot about adoptee sibling relationships that I didn't know, and how that's a source of pain for a lot of people. And for me, it was just a source of joy. And I always figured that was everybody's experience, but clearly everybody's experience isn't my experience.
So I just want to pull back to two very important themes, I think, that you've mentioned, and they are curiosity and empathy. And they seem really, really important to me. Well, more than seem, actually.
Yeah.
They and I've literally just done it, as I've told you before we started recording. I've literally done another, another recording, and I did this, and I expect other people to be as curious. I don't. I rate myself very highly on curiosity. I don't know whether I rate myself very highly on empathy, and maybe I'm kind of in the middle, somewhere. So sometimes I cause offence, and I've no idea that I've done it. And sometimes I don't cause offence, but think I have. So my ability to read, I don't see myself as particularly skilled in that, but I do rate myself quite highly on curiosity, and I think it's really important. And I think one of the mistakes I make is that I expect everybody to be as curious as me.
Yeah.
And they're clearly
Not everybody is. Or yeah, I can speak to my own like I'm kind of like you. I consider myself like high on the curiosity scale. I'm an analyst, systems analyst by my job. And I'm used to digging into details, asking people questions, that kind of thing. But as I was going through this exercise of writing a book about adoption, there were some areas I was surprised to find I wasn't curious about. And so I kind of looked at myself and I'm like, where's the block there, Terrie? One of those things was reaching out towards a reunion with my first mother. So we had an interesting circumstance. My first mother actually went to my adopted parents' household in the 1970s and said, look, this is driving me crazy. I have to know if my baby's okay, if she's in a good home. And fortunately, my parents were loving. I mean, they had a very loving interaction, and they alleviated her worry, but they didn't allow us a reunion at the time. I was early teen, like 13, 14. They're like, this is not a good time for Terrie to do that, but we promise when she's 18, we'll give you her information. And so this was before an 18-year-old could get their own information. So that was very generous. What was it? My interesting experience was when I turned 18, I was not immediately driven to go see her. And I didn't think much about it at the time. I mean, I just went on with 18-year-old life, went to college, got married, had a baby, still hadn't met her. And as I'm writing and researching this book, I'm like, why did I wait all that time? Why wasn't I curious in that moment, in my real life? And I still don't have a lot of answers about that, but I have I appreciate the opportunity to create more relationship with myself and dig into it and go, yeah, maybe everything wasn't okay. Maybe everything wasn't the adoption roses story. If it was, I might have just followed my natural curiosity, and went and saw her immediately. So yeah.
It's funny, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about what I said about myself, and I didn't have that curiosity either, and I and the way I saw that later on was, well, it was a good sign. It was a good sign. Now, as in, it was a sign that I was, what's the word? I mean, the jargon is securely attached, I think is the jargon that the shrinks would use.
Yeah.
And like, and the I've got one very strong example of practical, example of one very strong memory actually that I kind of think sums that up beautifully. Beautifully. I don't know. It sums it up anyway. It is that my parents, my sister asked me if I ever when she would be 8, I'd be 10, something around those ages. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I remember exactly what she said. Do you ever consider finding your real, searching for your real parents? Or did she say searching? Finding. I know. At 10, I wasn't really good. And I said, no, mum and dad are our real parents. And that wasn't me blowing smoke up her behind. That was the truth. Now, sorry, listeners, if you've heard me say this before, but I'm going to say it anyway. I started, so I finished. Shrinks can make anything linked to anything. That they can. I'm quite curious, and I'm also quite susceptible, and I'm quite gullible. I can take stuff on. I can take stuff on. I don't bat stuff away, and I think this is a double-edged sword. And I don't know really where I'm going here, but somebody can sow a seed in me, and it can grow. And I was talking to a fellow adoptee the other day, a couple of weeks ago, and she mentioned something, and it actually took me down. So I was saying something kind of in passing, and she almost catastrophized it. She made it into a bigger deal, and it landed on me. And afterwards I felt, ooh, that hurt. And despite all that, I still feel pretty securely attached to unfortunately my dad's died, but I feel securely attached to my mum. And I refer to my own primal wound, if there was one, as a paper cut rather than some people else have a shark bite. And I talk about two 20-second bursts of anger and fear towards my birth mother, 40 seconds in 55 years of life. And I really don't think I'm suppressing it. And yet I can still see, I can still be triggered. So I heard a joke. I something said in jest by somebody that I know yesterday about adoption. And it just knocked me slightly. It wobbled me. I didn't go into a meltdown. But this episode is supposed to be about you, so I think I've been rambling on a bit there. But I don't know why I started down that rabbit hole. But let's go back to the thing. What do you make of?
Well, what I wanted to point out was we were talking about curiosity when we didn't have curiosity. Maybe what's underlying that.
Yeah. Okay.
But what was really interesting going through this creative process of writing a book. So and I decided to make it a work of fiction. I looked into making it a memoir, but I really wanted to, after I interviewed my parents, I wanted to incorporate the perspective of the adoptive mother. And I also wanted to incorporate the perspective of the adoptive, of the relinquishing mother, right? The first mother. And so, and I knew that was tricky business because, I haven't had that experience myself. And so I knew I could never fully represent my mother's perspective properly. So I'm like, this is going to be a work of fiction. I'm going to research it and do it the best I can. But that was very important to me to like incorporate their perspectives. And so going through this, I got an opportunity to work with my editor and take the perspective of the reader, which I don't know if I would have ever taken the very careful time in which to do that unless I was writing for an audience. And so I remember we got to this point with my editor, and I'm like, I had done some research. I had done some reading about first moms and the relinquishment experience in the 60s. And I'm like, I am worried I'll trigger people. You know, I really want to do this, but I'm concerned about that. And I want this to be a loving, helpful story to folks. I don't want it to help, have them walk away feeling hurt in any way. And so that was another, like, those incremental steps of awakening. That was another one, talking about trigger, like just from a literary perspective, like, what do you think of trigger warnings in a book? Like, should I spend time in creating a trigger warning? Or like whatever caveats to the reader. And my editor was great. God bless her, Natalie Serber. She is like a partial psychologist, just in the work she does as a writing teacher. But she said, I don't think much of trigger warnings. She goes, make it clear in the title of your story what you're writing about, you know, and people can choose to pick up the book or not. She said, but life is trauma. And there's lots of experiences people have, and the experience you're going to talk about is adoption. And that's okay. People will still pick up the book. They will still come through it with their impressions that hopefully that they have chosen to go through. And that was super helpful for me as
Thank you
far
for
as opening up.
yeah. Thank you for rescuing us from the rabbit hole that I took us down. And I'm sorry that I took us down it, but hopefully it wasn't too disagreeable an experience. I never use a word like disagreeable. So how let me ask you a better question, right? So
Okay.
how do you feel that your curiosity has impacted your empathy for people in the triad, or
Oh,
contemplation, if you prefer that term?
it's expanded it hugely. Um, Even something as simple as, so I'll tell on myself a little bit. I signed up for some Facebook groups because there's a lot of different adoptee groups that have a particular perspective. Like they kind of follow, a channel of their feelings about adoption from adoptees' perspective. And I was kind of piping up in some of these Facebook forums, and people would say stuff to me like, have you read anything about adoption? I'm like, yes, I'm qualified to be here. I'm adoptee. I've read, I've talked. And they're like, yeah, but what you're saying is wrong, kind of thing. And I'm like, this is where I had to learn about like empathy. I'm like, what I'm saying was very true to my experience, but oftentimes I didn't leave room for other people's experience. I kind of wanted to like help people see my perspective without first appreciating their perspective and experiences.
Yeah,
And so like that was
interesting.
a real life example of it. One of the moderators kicked me out. And I actually am thankful for that because
What was the reason for kicking you out?
um because I was, what, you really want me to tell on myself all the way? I was speaking with another adoptee who was sharing, they had a good adoption experience. They were going through a kind of shadow time of their life, and they couldn't figure out why. And they thought maybe it was because of the primal wound, because they were adopted. And I'm like, isn't that convenient? I'm like, you've had a whole life. You're in your 40s or 50s, I'm like, it could be a whole ton of things that are putting you into this shadow time of your life. And the moderator's like, yeah, no, that's not respecting the person, get out. I'm like, that's kind of an honest question. It really could be a lot of things. But it was useful. And when I told the story like I am to you, to my first mother. So when I went, I flew out to her house to interview her, similar to my parents.
Yeah.
And I say interview like it's technical, but
Yeah.
we visit all the time, and it's like a chance to, hey, are you okay if I'm taking notes and I'm writing a book, and ask more details. But I told her my story about the Facebook group, and she was horrified. She's like, you did not say that, And I'm like, actually I did. And and then we had a chance to talk about how to improve my empathy and understanding and openness and giving space to other people's experiences that were different from mine.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a huge like wisdom leap for me.
Wisdom leap.
Yeah,
I
wisdom
love
leap.
that. Interestingly, I had some feedback on empathy from a fellow adoptee who was on the webinar that I did the other week. And she kind of like drew my attention to it, pretty much in the same, in a completely different way, but echoing very much what you just said. And I want to just share another quick story about this this trauma stuff and this primal wound. So have you read a book? I think I don't know how many books he's got, but have you heard of an author called Joe Soll? Have you heard of him? Joe Soll.
Joe Soll. That is not ringing a bell for me, but I'm writing it down.
Yeah. So he's there is an episode, an interview with him. I will link it in the show notes here,
Awesome.
listeners. So he's an adoptee. He's a therapist. He's a New Yorker, and he's getting, he's in his 80s, I think. I think he's in his 80s. He may be in his 70s, maybe in his 90s. I don't know. But we got on the Zoom with him, and he starts, and I just can't get a word in edgeways. And he gives me half an hour of trauma education, and then he takes breath, and I'm being respectful of the guy, trying to be respectful for all, I guess. I sometimes don't get it right. And he said, so he took a breath, and I kind of like saw an opportunity to ask him a question. I said, so is there any hope, Joe? He said, yeah, of course there's hope. I said, great. Well, I'll start recording it. You mean you haven't been recording already? I said, no, I haven't. Okay. So off we went. But so it is an adoptee talking to an adoptee, and for I don't know what reason, he has to, he gives me a trauma education lesson for 30 minutes. And that happened in the group. So you were told, have you not read anything about it? Have you not read anything about this? And I'm like, do we have to do this to one another? I said this in the podcast recording I just did before we spoke. The body keeps the score. It's like the primal wound. It's like a really triggering headline, isn't it? It's like a really ominous headline. It's like headlines in newspapers and on the media, warning of us of global meltdown. And people have to put the bejesus, scare the bejesus out of us to get our attention, because otherwise we're not interested. So they have to, really, like, and as a guy who, I talked about how I'm kind of susceptible and sensitive, and it scares me. And like, why do they have to do that?
Yeah. It's interesting. When I was going through writing this book, it was very important to me. And I told my editor, I told everybody, my moms, everybody, I'm like, I want to write a book about love. This is about, ways to expand your family and expand the human experience of supporting each other. That's very important to me. I said, and this topic makes it hard for people to see that sometimes. And but to be fair, if all I talked about was, the beautiful experience that I had and getting to know it from receiving a very loving adoptive family and from, getting to know a very loving first mother, everybody being open to relationships in all directions. If that was all I talked about, it wouldn't be really honest. And being truthful is really important, I think, if you want to tell a story of love. And so, and when you're really nitty gritty truthful, especially about, life is trauma, you're gonna have to include those tough points too. And that was a beautiful balance for me to systematically go through as I went through it. I can't use trauma as a crutch for all the problems in my life, adoption trauma. That's not true. It is there, but maybe to some degree, some that I may be aware of, some that I'm not. But there's also this like a whole lot of love and support, and I don't want all the efforts and all like my first mother's energies and concerns and what that drove her, to her decisions, to be overlooked. You know, so yeah, this balance is interesting. My mother in the very beginning, she asked me who was going to be the villain in my story. And I thought that was a really interesting question, um, because I didn't feel the need. I'm like, there won't be any villains. This story won't have villains. But of course, there comes a point in storytelling where there's like an opposition to the protagonist. And so that was just like a fascinating, again, creative exercise for me. I'm like, who is the villain in my adoption story? Is there one? To what degree? And that was, I would have never taken the time to consider that if I hadn't invested, this dedication of time to looking into my own story of adoption in great detail, and then, where that took me presenting it out to a reader. So yeah, it's super useful.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. When I think of systems analyst, I think of really techie stuff. But obviously, like you've got, maybe it's not as techie as I think it was. Maybe it's not as techie as a coder, I guess. It does it require, both left and massive generalization, but does it require systems analyst? You need left and right skills.
Yeah. So I was a coder.
Oh, right. Okay.
I was a coder in the beginning. I think people try to convince you that it doesn't require intuition, empathy, that kind of thing. But when you do, you need it. Everybody's using it in business. The people who just receive instructions and code them out probably aren't applying that. But to do analysis and understand what people's real needs are, it's really a game of understanding people's needs and trying to deliver them. And people have a heck of a hard time describing what their needs are. Like you have to read between the lines a lot, and you have to find ways to probe into their thinking so that they can describe what their needs and desires really are. And that's, I think, the art form. I was almost and I wrote a book on this. It was a decision series about how people make decisions, and it's like people want to like kind of train the intuition and feeling and whatever that left side out of you, but you actually, the more you embrace it, the richer any of those technical things turn out to be. So yeah, there's definitely a technical side. It's I think it's the detailed me or
Yeah.
the like patience for really nitpicky details. Not everybody can like slow themselves down enough for that, and I think that's my like technical side.
Yeah, fascinating. Um, are there other awakenings that you'd like to share with us, new awarenesses that came through this creative process that I've not asked you about, or you're not had a chance to share?
Yeah, there was as these experiences unfolded, it's kind of interesting to me how they started like outward. Like I started like the Facebook thing was some of the first things I did. Awareness of other people's experiences and awareness of my parents' experience, and then awareness of my first mother's experience. And gradually I got closer and I had to start reflecting on myself.
Yeah,
Um, and that was the hardest bit,
yeah. I'm
to be
sorry.
honest.
I'm laughing because I was thinking. I'm laughing because yeah. Before you started saying the outward stuff, I thought, yeah, we have been looking outward so far.
Yeah.
And so I'm not laughing because it was difficult. See, there's a prime example, right? I think I may have caused offence inadvertently, and then I haven't from the way you laughed. I hadn't. So there's a real life example where my radar's a bit wobbly. Yeah.
No, yeah, that was the hardest part. And it took the whole process to get there. And that's why
Wow.
I'm thankful for having a creative project. Like I really wanted to finish it. And if I didn't have a project driving me to keep going forward and going basically inward and more inward and more inward, I don't know if I would have gotten there, because it's a hard journey. And but I was glad I did. As I was writing these different perspectives, when you read prose, you often have like some action in the story, and then the character has reflection about they kind of justify why they did, or they reveal, their inner feelings and emotions about what's going on. And so I would get to these parts where now it was time to like reflect, and I had to find that within myself. So that was definitely a lot of the awakenings. That's where I started asking myself the questions: why did I wait 5 years to go introduce myself to my first mother, even after I know full well who she was and how to get a hold of her? And how was her feelings about that? I mean, I never thought about that once. And so it's easy to kind of brush that stuff on just the logistics of life. Like life didn't allow me to do that until then. But no, I made the choices. I waited till something was ready, about myself before I was ready to go see her face to face. And a lot of like people who aren't adopted or audience people would be like, why didn't you just like boom go there like the next day? I don't understand that. And so like in my story, I had to kind of explain myself, so yeah, that was an interesting experience. And what I will tell myself is I still haven't reached out to my um, biological father, and I know full well who he is and where he lives. And so I'm still taking this journey of self-awareness about what motivates me in my actions. And I would have never looked at those things unless I had picked up this project.
Yeah. So for me, it was never about my birth father, but I found out 11 days ago, 12 days ago,
Wow.
where he is or where he lived. We're 99% sure he's alive, but not sure. But I haven't reached out yet either. Yeah. Reach out. This is it's an American saying, this reach out thing. It's not common in the UK, and some Brits take offence to when Americanisms come over the pond. So there's a joke going on. There's a joke at the moment that unless you're in the Four Tops, you can't say reach out, because they had a song called Reach Out, and I'll be there or something. So, are you in the Four Tops? No. Well, so you can't say reach out. Are you American? Are you in the Four Tops? You can't say reach out if you're a Brit. I don't know what I say. So
now I learned a thing.
Yeah. I have an immense amount of completely useless trivia to share sometimes. Where would I go on this one? Right. What did you learn about when we say self-awareness? When we say self-awareness, we can mean, why we behave the way that we do. Sometimes we can mean why we think the way we do. And sometimes we can say, well, understanding who we are, like being aware of our self, like our true self, our essence, our spirit, our consciousness. Is that too? Does what I'm talking about make any sense to you? Because it's in my little world. Okay.
Keep going.
Right. So, how can I sum this up really quickly in a couple of sentences? Well, okay. So, it's metaphor time. Okay, it's metaphor time. So I name check a guy called Rupert Spira all the time, and this is his metaphor. Okay. So Rupert Spira is a consciousness, is an author who talks about consciousness, and by consciousness he means who we truly are, beneath what happens to us, beneath what we feel, beneath what we think. And so his metaphor is a screen. So we are a screen on which our experience appears. We are the screen, not the experience. And included in the experience is the story, the feelings, the thoughts. So that's what I kind of mean by consciousness. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what have you learned about what have you learned? That's a really big question. Go answer it any way you want. What have you learned about yourself through when you finally, you started the process by looking externally, you then shifted your focus to internal, looking at yourself. What have you learned about yourself? What do you continue to learn about yourself through this process?
Yeah, sure. Well, I did learn the kind of an innate need to share my feelings and thoughts. clearly it was important enough to me that I would go through a multi-year experience of putting together a book. And that was a little surprising to me.
Yeah.
But so there was this innate need, and I know you doing this podcast, you know, adoptees have this need to speak about their experiences, stories, and feelings. So I didn't know I had that, and I learned that about myself. I also learned I can like turn an eye to the uglier things, the hard things. Like I definitely focus on just the good stuff, and I only want to talk about that, and the rest I can. But it's better not to shove it aside. Worth the journey to face the things that I previously didn't want to look at. And that was that was a great win for myself.
Yeah.
And then I also learned I have some protection, some defenses that as much as I would like to bring them down, I haven't figured out how to bring them all down. And that's okay. Like I kind of made peace with some of my defenses, but encourage those things to continue growing. So so those are a few things that
Okay.
I really appreciated learning about myself. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, can you talk about the defenses with some examples? Would, if you're happy to do so, if you'd rather not, then that's totally okay as well.
Well, I already revealed a big one to you, which was not reaching out to my biological father. And I still kind of, so one of the things I knew when I was doing something good for myself was the voices that remind you something, that kind of turn in your head. They stopped. They like when I sent forward my final version of my book to my publisher, so many voices stopped in my head in a good way, like the spin finished and it felt like peace, right? And it felt like saying goodbye to something. But on these defensive pieces, the voice is still there. And so it's reminding me to come back and think about it someday. And that's okay. So I'm thinking I'll probably get to know that voice for a while, and then hopefully someday it will find its peaceful place too.
Yeah, that's beautiful. One of my early mentors, I don't speak to her as much on my stuff, on my curiosity fueled journey, says, if we're okay with not feeling okay, we're always okay. Yeah. If we're okay with not feeling okay, we're always okay. Most of the time, fighting our feelings prolongs the war, because we go to war with our feelings. And this is, I may be good at curiosity, but I'm even better at that. Like worrying about worrying. Yeah. So worry and then worry about worrying. So being at peace with your defenses, it is beautiful, because you're not fighting them.
Yep. Life's too short to fight that.
Yeah. Feels like a good place to bring it in.
It does.
As always, listeners, check out the show notes for the socials and the books that these beautiful authors are bringing to us. Is there anything else that I've not asked that you'd like to share before we wrap it up?
I really want to thank you for investing your time in the podcast and your webinars and the people that you speak to and share your thoughts with. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can you feel the place we've just got to in the last 30 seconds, or is it just me?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good with the space.
Yeah. Can you feel the space? I'm asking you. I've found where you took me to, and I kind of just reinforced it a little bit and teased it out. It took me to a place of incredible peace when you said, life's too short. Something loosened. Some of my defenses came down, I think, and I just touched a perfect place of peace. And I'm wondering whether you got there too, or is it just me?
I did.
Yeah,
I did.
that's cool. It's amazing
cool.
when we can. It is when we can think how we touch that space. My computer screen, your face is 18 inches from me, and you're on the screen, and your face is however many thousands of miles away on the other side of the pond, and yet that we were both in the same space.
It's incredible.
That's when we are one spiritual being. Yeah. Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you too.
Thank you.
I hope you've touched the space too, listeners. You're probably driving and you're thinking, what is Simon going on about? What's Terrie going on about? Well, go back and listen to it when you're not driving. Cool. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.